I spent 491 days in a Hamas tunnel. And I need to tell you what happened on day 319 before the story gets buried. My mother wrote something down that morning, thousands of miles away, something she couldn't have known. And when they matched the timestamps 3 weeks after my rescue, we both realized I wasn't alone in that darkness. Someone was there, and he knew both our names. My name is Talia Ashkenazi, and I need to tell you about the night I died and didn't die. Not in the way you think. I was taken on October 7th, 2023, from a kibbutz near the Gaza border. I was held for 491 days, starved, tortured. I watched 3 people I loved die in front of me. And on day 319, in the deepest part of that tunnel, when I had nothing left, I heard a voice. Not audible, not imagined, real. It spoke my name, and it told me I was not alone. I didn't know it then, but at that exact moment, my mother woke up in Tel Aviv from a dream. She saw me, she heard the same voice, and she wrote it down. 3 weeks after my rescue, we compared the dates, the times, the details, and we realized God had spoken to both of us in the same hour, across hundreds of miles. This is my testimony. If you've ever felt buried alive by circumstances you didn't choose, stay with me. Because what happened in that tunnel might be the answer you've been searching for. I remember the sky that morning, pale blue, stretched thin over the kibbutz like it was holding its breath. I didn't know why I noticed it. I'd seen 1,000 skies like that. But something in me paused. Something in me knew. I was 29 years old. I worked as a humanitarian aid coordinator for a small NGO near the Gaza border. We distributed medical supplies, food, clean water, tried to build bridges in a place where bridges kept burning. I believed in the work. I believed people could change. I believed proximity could heal what politics couldn't. I don't know if I believe that anymore. That morning, I was finishing my last shift before a week off. I was supposed to go home to Tel Aviv that afternoon, supposed to have Shabbat dinner with my mother. We hadn't spoken much in the past few months. Not really. We'd had one of those slow, quiet fractures that families get when faith becomes a fault line. She was devout. I was distant. She prayed every morning. I hadn't prayed in years. She believed God was present, active, involved. I believed God was somewhere. Maybe, if he existed at all. The night before, we'd argued on the phone. She'd called to confirm I was coming for dinner, and somehow the conversation turned. It always did. She asked if I'd been to synagogue. I said no. She asked if I was reading Torah. I said no. She asked if I was praying. I said, Ima, I don't think God is listening. There was a long silence. Then she said, God has not forgotten you, Talia, even when you forget him. I didn't respond. I just said I'd see her Friday night, and I hung up. I regretted it immediately, but I didn't call back. That was the last conversation we had before they took me. That morning, I was packing up supplies in the storage room when one of the younger volunteers, a girl named Shira, came in holding a small candle. It was white, half melted, left over from someone's Shabbat kit. She said, "Do you want this? I'm cleaning out the cabinet." I almost said no. But then I remembered something my grandmother used to do. She would light 3 candles every Shabbat. Not 2, like tradition called for. 3. When I asked her why, she said, the first is for remembrance. The second is for observance. The third is for hope. Hope for what? I'd asked. She smiled. Hope that the light doesn't go out. I took the candle from Shira. I don't know why, I slipped it into my bag and said thank you. She shrugged and left. I stood there for a moment, holding that candle, and I thought about my grandmother. She'd passed 2 years earlier. She used to pray over me in Hebrew and in whispers I didn't understand. She'd place her hands on my head and say, God hides so we will seek. I never knew what she meant. But standing there that morning, with that candle in my hand and the sky holding its breath outside, I felt something. Not peace, not fear, just awareness, like the air before lightning. I left the kibbutz at noon. I was supposed to catch a ride back to Tel Aviv with a friend, but he got delayed. So I stayed. I walked around the perimeter. I checked the fence line. I watched the horizon. Gaza was less than 2 miles away. You could see the buildings. You could hear the call to prayer in the evenings. You could feel the tension, always, like a wire pulled too tight. I'd worked near the border for 3 years. I'd never felt unsafe. But that day, I felt it. I texted my mother at 2:47 p.m. I wrote, "I'm staying another night. I'll be home tomorrow. I'm sorry about last night." She replied immediately, "It's okay, Mama Le. I love you. Be safe." I stared at that message for a long time. I didn't write back. That evening, I sat with a few of the staff in the common room. We ate hummus and pita. We talked about nothing. One of the guys, a medic named Yonatan, was telling a story about a patient who tried to pay him in chickens. Everyone laughed. I didn't. I kept looking at the window, at the sky, at the darkness gathering just beyond the lights of the kibbutz. Yonatan noticed. He said, "You okay, Talia?" I nodded, "Yeah, just tired." He didn't push, but I wasn't tired. I was afraid. And I didn't know why. I went to bed around 10. I lay there in the small volunteer housing unit, staring at the ceiling. I thought about my mother. I thought about my grandmother. I thought about the third candle. I thought about the phrase, "God hides, so we will seek." And I wondered, if God was hiding, why wasn't I seeking? Why had I stopped? I fell asleep with that question hanging in the air, unanswered. I didn't know that in less than 8 hours, I'd be dragged from that bed. I didn't know that I'd spend the next 491 days in darkness. I didn't know that the third candle I'd taken that morning would become the only light I had left. And I didn't know that on day 319, in the deepest part of a tunnel I couldn't escape, God would stop hiding. And I would finally seek. October 7th, 2023, 5:47 a.m. I woke to the sound of rockets. Not distant. Not the kind you hear and think it's far away, it's handled. Close. The air raid siren was screaming. The walls were shaking. I could hear shouting outside, Hebrew and Arabic. Chaos splitting the morning in half. I rolled out of bed, hit the floor, crawled toward the reinforced corner of the room like we'd been trained to do. My hands were shaking. My breath was shallow. I reached for my phone. No signal. I tried again. Nothing. The rocket stopped. For a moment, there was silence. And then I heard gunfire. I don't know how long I stayed in that corner. Minutes. Maybe longer. The gunfire got closer. I heard screaming. I heard boots on gravel. I heard someone shouting in Arabic. Commands I didn't understand. Then the door exploded inward. 3 men. Faces covered. Rifles raised. One of them grabbed me by the arm and yanked me to my feet. I tried to pull away. He hit me across the face with the back of his hand. My vision went white. I tasted blood. He said something I didn't understand. Then he dragged me outside. The kibbutz was burning. I could see smoke rising from the dining hall. I could see bodies on the ground. I could see other people being pulled from their rooms, hands zip-tied, faces blank with shock. I saw Yonatan, the medic. He was on his knees, hands behind his head, blood running down his temple. I saw Liora, one of the teachers. She was crying, silent, her mouth open but no sound coming out. I saw Eitan, the engineer. He wasn't moving. They were dragging him. They shoved us into the back of a truck. 4 of us, hands bound. No words, just the smell of smoke and gasoline and fear. The truck started moving. I looked back at the kibbutz, at the place I'd called home for 3 years. It was disappearing into the smoke. And I realized I might never see my mother again. We drove for maybe 20 minutes. I couldn't tell. Time had stopped making sense. Everything was adrenaline and terror and the taste of copper in my mouth. When the truck stopped, they pulled us out. We were in the middle of nowhere. Dirt, rocks, a few scattered buildings that looked abandoned. And then I saw it. A hole in the ground. Not a hole, an entrance, a tunnel. They pushed us toward it. Yonatan tried to resist. They hit him with the butt of a rifle. He went down. Liora screamed. They hit her too. I didn't resist. I just walked down into the dark. The tunnel was narrow, low ceiling, dirt walls reinforced with concrete and metal beams. It smelled like earth and mildew and something else, something old and rotten. They pushed us deeper. We walked for what felt like hours. My wrists were bleeding from the zip ties. My legs were shaking. I kept thinking, this is it. This is where they kill us. But they didn't. They stopped at a small chamber, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. Concrete floor, no windows, one dim bulb hanging from a wire. They cut the zip ties. They shoved us inside. They said something in Arabic, then they left. The metal door slammed shut, and we were alone for a long time. No one spoke. Yonatan was leaning against the wall, holding his head. Blood was still dripping from his temple. Liora was sitting in the corner, knees pulled to her chest, rocking back and forth. Eitan was on the floor, staring at nothing. I was standing in the middle of the room, trying to breathe, trying to think, trying not to fall apart. Finally, Yonatan said, "Is everyone okay?" No one answered. He said it again, "Is everyone okay?" Liora whispered, "No." Yonatan nodded. Okay, we're gonna be okay." Eitan laughed. It was a hollow, broken sound. He said, "We're not getting out of here." Yonatan looked at him. "Don't say that." Eitan said, "Look around, Yonatan. Look where we are. They didn't bring us here to negotiate." Liora started crying. I sat down. I pulled my knees to my chest. I closed my eyes. And I thought about my mother. I thought about the last thing she said to me. God has not forgotten you, Talia, even when you forget him. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that somewhere, beyond this tunnel, beyond this darkness, God was still there. But I didn't feel him. I felt nothing. On the second day, they brought us water, 1 bottle for 4 people. On the third day, they brought us bread, stale, moldy. We ate it anyway. On the 5th day, they took Eitan. He was gone for 6 hours. When they brought him back, he didn't speak. He didn't look at us. He just sat in the corner and stared at the wall. By day 12, we realized they weren't planning to let us go. By day 30, we realized some of us wouldn't leave alive. And by day 45, I realized I had a choice. I could let this place kill me, or I could find a reason to survive. I reached into my pocket. The candle was still there. The third candle, the one I'd taken from Shira the morning before the attack. I held it in my hand, and I remembered my grandmother's words. The third candle is for hope. Hope that the light doesn't go out. I didn't have matches. I didn't have a wick, but I had the candle. And I decided I would find a way to light it. Because if the light went out, I didn't know what I'd become. Day 45. That's when I made the first candle. Not the one from the kibbutz. That one I kept hidden, wrapped in a torn piece of fabric I'd pulled from my shirt. I didn't want to use it, not yet. It felt like the last piece of the world I'd lost. And I wasn't ready to let it burn. But I needed light. Not just physical light. I needed something to fight the dark that was growing inside me. So I made one. Yonatan helped me. He was the only one still trying. Liora had stopped speaking by day 30. She would whisper psalms sometimes, late at night, but during the day she was silent. Eitan hadn't spoken since they brought him back. He just sat, stared, breathed. Yonatan found a small piece of wire in the corner of the cell. I don't know how it got there. Maybe it had fallen from the ceiling. Maybe someone before us had left it. He bent it into a small holder. I tore a strip of fabric from the hem of my pants. We soaked it in a few drops of oil we'd saved from a meal, if you could call it a meal. Watery soup, a piece of bread, sometimes nothing. We didn't have matches, but one of the guards smoked. Yonatan asked him, in broken Arabic, for a light. The guard laughed, but he did it. He lit a cigarette, handed it through the slot in the door, and walked away. We lit the fabric. It caught a small flame, weak, flickering, but it was light. I don't know how to explain what that flame did to us. It wasn't just light. It was defiance. It was hope. It was proof that we were still human, still capable of creating something in a place designed to destroy us. Liora looked at it and cried. Eitan looked at it and closed his eyes. Yonatan looked at it and smiled. I looked at it and I remembered my grandmother. The third candle is for hope. I whispered it out loud, the third candle. Yonatan looked at me. What? I shook my head. Nothing, just something my grandmother used to say. He nodded. He didn't ask more. But from that day on, every time we lit that makeshift candle, I called it the third candle. And every time I said it, I felt a little less alone. Day 67. They stopped giving us food for 3 days. I don't know why. Punishment, cruelty, maybe they forgot. By the third day, I was too weak to stand. Yonatan tried to keep our spirits up. He told stories, jokes, memories of his family. His daughter, she was 5. He hadn't seen her in 2 months. He said, when I get out of here, I'm gonna hold her and never let go. Liora whispered, you'll get out. He looked at her. We'll all get out. She didn't respond. Eitan laughed, that same hollow, broken laugh. He said, you're lying to yourself. Yonatan's face hardened. I'm keeping us alive. Eitan said, we're already dead. Day 89. I started seeing things. Not hallucinations. Not exactly. Memories. But they felt more real than the cell around me. I saw my grandmother sitting at her kitchen table, lighting the Shabbat candles. I saw her hands, wrinkled and steady, as she waved them over the flames and whispered the blessing. I saw my mother, younger, laughing, holding me when I was a child. I saw myself standing in a synagogue I hadn't been to in years, listening to the Torah being read, feeling something I couldn't name. And I heard a voice, not out loud, not in my head exactly, somewhere in between. It said, God hides, so we will seek. I opened my eyes. The cell was dark. The candle had burned out hours ago. But I felt something, a presence, not comforting, not yet. Just there, like I wasn't alone. Day 103. Yonatan got sick. Fever. Chills. He couldn't keep food down. Not that there was much to keep down. Liora tried to help him. She tore a piece of her sleeve, soaked it in the little water we had, and pressed it to his forehead. He looked at her and said, thank you. She nodded. It was the first time I'd seen her do something for someone else in weeks. I realized we were starting to disappear. Not physically. Not yet. But the people we'd been, they were fading. And I didn't know how to stop it. Day 128. I lit the third candle again. This time, I prayed. I didn't know who I was praying to. I didn't know if anyone was listening. But I prayed. I said, if you're there, if you're real, I need you to show me. Because I don't know how much longer I can do this. Nothing happened. No voice. No vision. No sign. Just the flame. Flickering. Weak. But still burning. Day 150. Yonatan was getting worse. He couldn't stand anymore. He could barely speak. Liora sat with him, holding his hand, whispering psalms. I heard her say, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Her voice cracked. She said, he makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. She stopped. She looked at me. She said, Talia, do you think God is still here? I didn't know what to say. I looked at Yonatan, dying on the floor of a tunnel. I looked at Eitan, broken and silent in the corner. I looked at Liora, desperate for an answer I didn't have. And I said, I don't know. She nodded. She said, me neither. But that night, after they were asleep, I took out the real candle. The one from the kibbutz. The one I'd been saving. I held it in my hands. And I whispered, God, if you're hiding, I'm seeking. Please, please don't let the light go out. I didn't light it. Not yet. But I held it. And for the first time in 150 days, I felt something other than fear. I felt possibility. Small, fragile, but real. What I didn't know was that thousands of miles away, my mother was praying too. She'd been sitting Shiva for me since November. She thought I was dead. The government had told her, presumed deceased. But every night, she lit 3 candles. And every night, she prayed the same prayer. God, if she's alive, let her know. You're with her. I didn't know that. I wouldn't know it for a long time. But on day 150, in a tunnel beneath Gaza, and in a small apartment in Tel Aviv, 2 women were praying to the same God. And he was listening to both of us. Day 237. Yonatan was dying. We all knew it. He knew it. His fever had never broken. His breathing was shallow, rattling. He couldn't eat, could barely drink. Liora sat with him every day, whispering prayers, holding his hand. Eitan didn't look at him. I tried to help. I gave him my water ration. I tried to keep him warm with what little fabric we had. But there was nothing we could do. We were in a tomb, and he was slipping away. Day 241. He asked me to sit with him. His voice was so weak I had to lean in close to hear him. He said, Talia, do you believe in God? I hesitated. I said, I don't know. He nodded, slowly. Like even that small movement hurt. He said, I do. I looked at him. How? After everything? He smiled. Just a little. Because I have to. I didn't understand. He said, if I don't believe, then this is all there is. This cell, this pain, this end. And I can't let that be true. His eyes filled with tears. He said, I have to believe my daughter will remember me. That I'll see her again, somewhere, somehow. I held his hand. I said, you will. He looked at me. Do you believe that? I didn't, but I said yes. He closed his eyes. He said, thank you. Day 244. He stopped breathing at 3 a.m. I was holding his hand. Liora was praying. Eitan was staring at the wall. And Yonatan just left. One moment he was there, struggling, fighting. The next, he was gone. I felt it. The absence, the weight of it. Liora stopped praying. She looked at me. She said, what do we do? I didn't know. We had no way to bury him, no way to honor him, no way to tell his family. We just sat there with his body in the dark. They came for him 6 hours later. They dragged him out without a word. We never saw him again. Day 319. I was alone with Liora and Eitan, but it felt like I was alone with ghosts. Liora had stopped whispering psalms. She just sat, silent, staring. Eitan hadn't moved in days. I didn't know if he was even still aware of where he was. And I was breaking. Not physically, not yet. But inside, I could feel it. The slow collapse, the giving up. I hadn't lit the 3rd candle in weeks. I hadn't prayed. I hadn't hoped. I just existed, breathing, barely. That night, they brought us food. A piece of bread, stale, hard. I gave mine to Liora. She didn't eat it. I gave it to Eitan. He didn't even look at it. So I sat there holding that piece of bread and I thought, this is it. This is how it ends. Not with violence, not with drama, just fading, disappearing. And I started to cry. Not loud, not desperate, just quiet, empty. I said out loud to no one, I can't do this anymore. And then I heard it, a voice, not out loud, not in my head, somewhere deeper. It said Talia. I froze. I looked around. Liora was asleep. Eitan was motionless. No one had spoken. But I'd heard it. Clear. Unmistakable. Talia. I whispered, Who is this? The voice said, I have not left you. My breath caught. I said, I don't understand. The voice said, I am the light in the third candle. I am the hope you have carried. I am the one your grandmother prayed for. I am the one your mother is praying for right now. Tears were streaming down my face. I said, Are you God? The voice said, I am the sun. I am the light. I am the way. I knew. I don't know how, but I knew. It was Jesus. Yeshua. The one my grandmother had whispered about in prayers I didn't understand. The one I'd been taught to respect but never follow. The one I'd never believed in, but he was there. In that tunnel, in that darkness. Real. I said, why now? Why here? He said, because you are finally seeking. And I remembered, God hides so we will seek. I said, I've been seeking. I've been praying. I've been trying. He said, you've been surviving. Now you are seeking me. I didn't understand the difference, but I felt it. He said, you are not alone, Talia. You have never been alone, and you will not die here. I shook my head. I'm gonna die here. We all are. He said, you will leave this place, and you will tell them what you have seen. I said, I haven't seen anything. He said, you will. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes, hours. Time didn't exist. There was only his presence. Not visible, not tangible, but more real than the walls around me. I felt known. Not just seen, known. Every doubt, every fear, every moment I turned away. He knew it all. And he was still there. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the real candle. The one from the kibbutz. The one I'd been saving. I said out loud, I don't have a way to light it. And then I heard footsteps. A guard was coming. He opened the slot in the door. He tossed in a cigarette lighter. He said something in Arabic I didn't understand. Then he walked away. I stared at the lighter. I picked it up. I lit the candle. The flame caught. Small, fragile, but burning. I held it up and I whispered, the third candle for hope. And the voice said, I am the hope that does not go out. I sat there holding that candle and I prayed. Not the prayers of my childhood, not the prayers I'd been taught. I prayed, Jesus, Yeshua, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what this means, but if you're real, if you're here, I'm yours. I surrender. I can't carry this anymore. So if you'll take it, it's yours. The flame flickered, but it didn't go out. And I felt peace. Not happiness, not relief, just peace. Like I'd been holding my breath for 29 years and I'd finally exhaled. I didn't know it then. But at that exact moment, in a small apartment in Tel Aviv, my mother woke up. It was 3:47 a.m. She'd been dreaming. She saw me, in darkness, surrounded by light. And she heard a voice say, she is mine, she will return. She sat up in bed, shaking, tears streaming down her face. She reached for her journal. She wrote it down. The date, the time, the words. And the next morning, she told her rabbi, she said, I don't know if she's alive, but I know God spoke to me, and I know she's not alone. I didn't know any of that. I wouldn't know it for months. But on day 319, in a tunnel beneath Gaza, and in a small apartment in Tel Aviv, God spoke to both of us at the same time, in the same hour, and we both heard Him. Day 320, I woke up different, not healed, not free, but different. The candle had burned out during the night, but something in me hadn't. I looked at Liora. She was awake, staring at the ceiling. I said, Liora. She didn't respond. I said it again. Liora. She turned her head slowly. Her eyes were empty. I said, I heard something last night. She blinked. I said, a voice. I think it was God. She stared at me for a long time. Then she said, God isn't here, Talia. I shook my head. He is. I know He is. She closed her eyes. Then why doesn't He save us? I didn't have an answer. Not one that made sense. But I said, maybe He already is. She didn't respond. Day 327. They came for Liora. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She just stood up and walked out. I tried to stop them. I grabbed her arm. I said, no, please, not her. One of the guards shoved me back. Hard. I hit the wall. Eitan didn't move. The door slammed shut. And she was gone. She came back 3 days later. But she wasn't Liora anymore. She was broken. Shattered. She couldn't walk on her own. They dragged her in and dropped her on the floor. I crawled to her. I said, Liora. Liora, I'm here. She didn't look at me. She just whispered, let me die. I held her. I said, no, no, you're going to be okay. She said it again, let me die. I didn't know what to say. So I prayed out loud. I said, Jesus, Yeshua, please, please help her. Please don't let her go like this. Leora's eyes opened. She looked at me. She said, you're praying to Him? I nodded. Yes. She said, why? I said, because He is the only one who answered. She closed her eyes. She whispered, then asked Him to take me home. Day 330. Liora stopped breathing. I was holding her hand. She didn't fight it. She didn't struggle. She just let go. And I sat there in that cell with her body in my arms, and I wept. Not quite tears. Not dignified grief. I wept like a child. I said, why? Why did you let her suffer like that? Why didn't you save her? No voice answered. No presence. Just silence. And I felt abandoned. Like the encounter on day 319 had been a dream. A hallucination. A desperate mind creating comfort where there was none. But then I remembered. The candle. The lighter that appeared. The peace I'd felt. And I realized He hadn't promised to save us from this. He'd promised to be with us in it. They took Liora's body that afternoon. I never saw her again. Day 335. I was alone with Eitan. He still hadn't spoken. He barely moved. I didn't know if he even knew Liora was gone. I tried to talk to him. I said, Eitan, it's just us now. Nothing. I said, Eitan, please, I need you to stay with me. Nothing. I sat next to him. I said, I met God in here. I know that sounds crazy, but I did. And I think He's the only reason I'm still alive. Eitan's eyes moved, just slightly. He looked at me, and he said, in a voice I barely recognized, then why am I still here? It was the first thing he'd said in months. I said, because He's not done with you yet. He laughed. That same hollow, broken laugh. He said, He's not done torturing me, you mean? I shook my head. No, that's not Him. That's them. That's this place. But He's here, even in this. Eitan closed his eyes. He said, I don't believe you. I said, you don't have to. but I'm going to keep believing for both of us. He didn't respond. Day 362. They moved me. No warning. No explanation. They came in, grabbed me, dragged me out. I screamed, "What about him? What about Eitan?" They didn't answer. I looked back. Eitan was sitting in the corner, staring at nothing. I shouted, "Eitan, I'll come back, I promise." The door slammed shut. I never saw him again. The new cell was smaller, darker. No light. No bulb. Just stone and silence. I was alone. Completely alone. And for the first time since day 319, I felt afraid. Not of dying. Of losing him. Of losing the presence I'd felt. I whispered, "Are you still here?" No answer. I said it louder. "Are you still here?" Nothing. I started to panic. I said, "Please, please don't leave me. I can't do this alone." And then I felt it. Not a voice. Not a vision. Just warmth in the center of my chest. Small, steady, like a flame that wouldn't go out. And I knew he was still there. Day 389. They stopped giving me food. I don't know why. Punishment, cruelty, neglect. It didn't matter. By day 3, I was too weak to stand. By day 5, I couldn't think straight. By day 7, I was hallucinating. I saw my mother, my grandmother, Yonatan, Liora. I saw light. Blinding. Beautiful. I thought I was dying. And I wasn't afraid. I whispered, okay, I'm ready. Take me home. But he said, not yet. I said, why? He said, because your mother is still praying. And I am still answering. Day 396. They brought food again. I don't know why, but I ate. And I survived. Day 421. I heard explosions. Distant, but real. The walls shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. I sat up. I said, what's happening? No one answered. But I felt something. Hope. Dangerous. Fragile. But real. Day 450. The explosions were closer. I could hear voices above. Shouting. Hebrew. I started screaming. I'm here. I'm down here. No one came. But I kept screaming. Every day. Every hour. I'm here. Please. I'm here. Day 460. I found out later that's the day Eitan died. Alone. In the cell I'd left him in. I didn't know. I couldn't have known. But I felt it. A weight. A grief. I prayed for him that day. I said, Jesus, if he's with you now, please tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I tried. Day 487. The explosions were right above me. I could hear gunfire, shouting, chaos. I pressed myself against the wall and prayed. Not for rescue, just for peace. I said, if this is the end, thank you. Thank you for meeting me. Thank you for not leaving me. The door didn't open, but I felt him. Closer than ever. Day 490. I heard Hebrew. Clear. Close. I screamed. I'm here. I'm Israeli. I'm here. Footsteps. Running. The door exploded inward. Light flooded the cell. I couldn't see. I covered my eyes. A voice said, in Hebrew, we've got one. She's alive. Hands lifted me. I said, there are others. Please, there are others. The soldier said, we're looking. I said, Eitan, Liora, Yonatan, please. He didn't answer. Day 491. I was carried out of the tunnel, into the light, into the air, into the world I thought I'd never see again. I looked up at the sky. It was pale blue, just like the morning they took me. And I whispered, thank you. I don't remember much of the first 3 days. Hospital, tubes, machines, voices speaking Hebrew, English, words I couldn't hold on to. I remember someone asking my name. I remember saying, Talia Ashkenazi. I remember them saying, we're calling your family. And I remember crying. Day 4, I woke up to my mother's face. She was sitting beside my bed, holding my hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. She said, Mamale. I said, Ima. And we both broke. She climbed into the bed with me, careful of the IV lines, and held me like I was a child again. She said, I thought you were dead. They told me you were dead. I said, I thought I was too. She pulled back, looked at me, touched my face like she was making sure I was real. She said, how? How did you survive? I looked at her and I said, God. She froze. I said, I met him, Ima, in the tunnel. I met Yeshua. Her eyes widened. She didn't speak. I said, I know what that means. I know what you're thinking, but it's true. He spoke to me. He was with me. He's the reason I'm here. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, tell me. So I did. I told her about day 319, about the voice, about the candle, about the peace I'd felt, about Yonatan, Liora, Eitan, about the darkness and the light that wouldn't go out. She listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't argue. When I finished, she was crying again. She said, Talia, there's something I need to tell you. I looked at her. She said, on day 319, I had a dream. My breath caught. She said, I woke up at 3:47 inches the morning. I saw you. You were in darkness, but there was light around you. And I heard a voice. It said, she is mine. She will return. I stared at her. She said, I wrote it down. I didn't know if you were alive, but I wrote it down. And I told Rabbi Feldman the next morning. I couldn't speak. She said, I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it was real. I whispered, what day was that? She said, I have it written down. I can show you. I said, show me. She brought the journal 2 days later, a small leather-bound book she'd kept for years. She opened it to a page marked with a ribbon. The date was there, clear, unmistakable. Day 319. The time, 3:47 a.m. The words, I saw Talia in darkness. Light surrounded her. A voice said, she is mine. She will return. I don't understand, but I know it was God. I read it 3 times. I looked at her. I said, that's the night. That's the exact night I heard him. She nodded, tears falling. I said, what time was it for me? She did the math. Time zones. Gaza to Tel Aviv. She said, if it was late night for you, early morning, it would have been the same hour. We sat there in silence. And then I said, he spoke to both of us. She whispered, yes. If this moment, this impossible, undeniable moment stirred something in you, subscribe. Because there are people searching for proof that God still speaks. And this is it. Day 12 post-rescue. A chaplain came to visit me. His name was David, Messianic Jewish, gentle, kind. He said, I heard you've been through something extraordinary. I nodded. He said, would you like to talk about it? So I told him everything. When I finished, he was quiet. Then he said, Talia, do you know what you've been given? I shook my head. He said, a testimony. Not just a story, a testimony. And testimonies are meant to be shared. I said, I don't know if anyone will believe me. He smiled. That's not your job. Your job is to tell the truth. God will do the rest. Day 15. A nurse asked me about the scars on my wrists. From the zip ties. From the months of captivity. I told her. She cried. She said, how are you even alive? I said, Jesus. She looked at me, surprised. I said, I'm serious. He's the only reason. She didn't know what to say. But the next day, she brought me a small cross necklace. She said, I've had this since I was a girl. I want you to have it. I put it on. I haven't taken it off since. Day 20. A reporter came. I didn't want to talk to him. But my mother said, Talia, people need to know, not just what happened, but who was with you. So I agreed. He asked the standard questions. Where were you held? How did you survive? What do you want people to know? And then he asked, do you have any anger toward your captors? I paused. I said, I have grief, I have sorrow for what they did, but anger, no. He looked surprised. I said, because the same God who met me in that tunnel loves them too. And if he can forgive me, I have to believe he can forgive them. The reporter stared at me. He said, that's remarkable. I said, that's Jesus. Day 23. I asked for a candle. The nurse brought me one, white, unscented. I lit it. I placed it on the table beside my bed. And I said out loud, the third candle, for hope. My mother was there. She said, what does that mean? I told her about my grandmother, about the ritual, about what it had become in the tunnel. She listened. Then she said, can I light one with you? I nodded. She lit a second candle. We sat there together, watching the flames. And she said, I'm starting to understand. I looked at her. She said, why you believe? Why you're different now? I said, I'm not different, Ima. I'm just awake. She smiled, tears in her eyes. She said, then wake me up too. Day 28. I was discharged from the hospital. I went home with my mother to the apartment I hadn't seen in almost 17 months. Everything was the same, but I was different. I walked through the rooms, touching things I'd forgotten. Books, photos, my grandmother's shawl, folded on a chair. I picked it up. I held it to my face. And I whispered, you were right, Safta. God hides, so we will seek. And I found him. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, looking out at the city. Tel Aviv, alive, bright, free. And I thought about Yonatan, Liora, Eitan. I thought about the others still captive, still suffering. And I prayed, not for myself, for them. I said, Jesus, be with them, the way you were with me. Let them know they're not alone. And I felt him say, I am. The next morning, my mother came into my room. She said, Talia, I think it's time. I said, time for what? She held up the journal. She said, time to show people what God did. I looked at her. She said, the journal, the rabbi's notes, your testimony, the dates, the times, it all matches. I said, do you think people will care? She said, I think people need to know that God is still speaking, still moving, still rescuing. I nodded. I said, okay. She smiled. She said, then let's tell them. 3 weeks after my rescue, my mother and I sat down with Rabbi Feldman. He was an older man, kind eyes, white beard. He'd known my family for years. He'd been the one my mother went to on the morning of her dream. We sat in his study, surrounded by books, the smell of old paper and tea. My mother had brought her journal. I had brought my story. Rabbi Feldman looked at both of us and said, tell me everything. My mother went first. She opened the journal to the marked page. She said, this is the entry from day 319 of Talia's captivity. I woke at 3:47 a.m. from a dream. I saw my daughter in darkness surrounded by light. I heard a voice say, she is mine, she will return. She slid the journal across the table. Rabbi Feldman, read it carefully. He nodded. He said, I remember. You came to me that morning. You were shaking. You said you didn't know if it was real or if you were losing your mind. My mother nodded. What did you tell me? He smiled softly. I told you to write it down, to hold on to it, because sometimes God speaks in dreams, and sometimes those dreams are more real than we know. He pulled out a small notebook of his own. He flipped through the pages. He stopped. He said, "Here, I documented our conversation. Same date, same details." He showed us. The handwriting was neat, precise. The date matched. The time matched. The words matched. Rabbi Feldman looked at me. He said, "Now tell me your side." I took a breath. I said, "On day 319, I was in the tunnel. My friend Yonatan had just died in my arms. I was broken. I didn't think I could survive another day." I paused. I said, and then I heard the voice. It wasn't audible, but it was real. It spoke my name. It said, "I have not left you. I am the light in the third candle." Rabbi Feldman leaned forward. I continued. It told me I wasn't alone, that I would survive, that I would leave that place and tell people what I'd seen. I looked at him. I said, "It was Jesus, Yeshua. I know that's hard for you to hear, but it was him." Rabbi Feldman was quiet. Then he said, "What time did this happen?" I said, "Late night, maybe early morning. I'd lost exact track of time by then, but it was the darkest part of the night." He looked at my mother. He looked at the journal. He did the math. He said, "Gaza is in the same time zone as Tel Aviv." My mother nodded. He said, "So if you woke at 3:47 a.m. and Talia experienced this in the darkest part of the night." I said, "It was the same moment." He sat back in his chair. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "This is not coincidence." My mother said, "No, it's not." He looked at me. "You believe it was Yeshua?" I nodded. "I do." He said, "And you believe he spoke to both of you at the same time, across hundreds of miles?" I said, "I don't just believe it, I know it." Rabbi Feldman stood. He walked to the window, hands behind his back. He said, "I have spent my life studying Torah, studying the prophets, waiting for Messiah." He turned to look at me. He said, "And I have always wondered, what would it look like when he came? How would we know?" He gestured to the journal, to his notes. He said, This is what it looks like." My mother's eyes filled with tears. He said, "I'm not saying I understand it all. I'm not saying I'm ready to follow where you've gone, Talia. But I am saying this is the hand of God, and it cannot be denied. If the reveal, the journal, the timestamps, the undeniable proof answer the question you've been carrying, leave one word in the comments that captures what you're feeling. Light, hope, truth. Let us know. It helps others find testimonies like this." My mother said, "What do we do with this?" Rabbi Feldman said, "You share it. You document it. You let people see what God has done." I said, "And if they don't believe?" He said, "Then that's between them and God. But you've been given proof. Tangible, documented, corroborated. That's rare, Talia. That's a gift." We left his study that afternoon with copies of everything. The journal entry, the rabbi's notes, the dates, the times, the testimony, all of it. Undeniable. That night, I sat with my mother in her living room. The journal was open on the table between us. I said, "Do you believe me now about Yeshua?" She was quiet. Then she said, "I believe God spoke to you. I believe he spoke to me. I believe he orchestrated something impossible to show us he's real." She paused. She said, "I don't know yet what that means about Yeshua, but I'm asking, I'm seeking." I reached across the table and took her hand. I said, "That's all he asks." 2 months later, I was invited to share my testimony at a Messianic congregation in Jerusalem. I was terrified. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I was ready, but I went. The room was small, maybe 50 people. I stood at the front, holding a candle, the third candle. I told them everything. The attack, the tunnel, the darkness. Yonatan, Liora, Eitan. Day 319. The voice, the dream, the journal, the proof. When I finished, the room was silent. Then a woman in the back stood up. She said, I lost my son on October 7th. He was taken. We never found him. Her voice broke. She said, I've been angry at God. I've been asking why he didn't save him. She looked at me. She said, but hearing your story, I realize maybe he was with him, the way he was with you. Maybe my son wasn't alone. I nodded, tears streaming. I said, he wasn't. I promise you, he wasn't. She sat down, weeping, and I realized this was why I survived. Not just to tell my story, but to give hope to those still waiting, still grieving, still wondering if God sees them. 3 months post-rescue, I was contacted by the IDF unit that extracted me. They said they'd recovered remains from the tunnel where I'd been held. Liora, Eitan, they were bringing them home. I attended both funerals. I met their families. I told them what I knew, that they weren't alone, that they were loved, that their suffering wasn't forgotten. Liora's mother held my hands and said, thank you for being with her. Eitan's father said, I'm glad you made it out. Yonatan's daughter, now 6 years old, gave me a drawing. It was a picture of her dad, smiling. She said, he's in heaven now, right? I knelt down. I said, yes, he is. She said, is he happy? I said, yes, he's with Jesus and he's waiting for you. She hugged me and I wept. 6 months post-rescue. My mother lit 3 candles on Shabbat. She said the blessing. And then she said, the 3rd candle is for hope. I looked at her, surprised. She smiled. She said, I'm learning. I said, learning what? She said, that God doesn't hide to punish us. He hides so we'll seek him. And when we do, he's there. I hugged her. I said, you're gonna find him, Ima. She said, I think I already am. 1 year post-rescue, I was invited to speak at a conference. Hundreds of people, survivors, families, seekers. I stood on that stage, holding the journal, my mother's journal. I held it up. I said, this is proof, not just that I survived, but that God is real, that he speaks, that he moves, that he rescues. I opened it. I read the entry. Day 319, 3:47 a.m. She is mine. She will return. I said, on that exact night, in a tunnel beneath Gaza, I heard the same voice. I felt the same presence, and I knew I wasn't alone. I closed the journal. I said, some of you are in tunnels right now, not literal ones, but dark places. Places where you can't see the way out. Places where you wonder if God even knows you're there. I paused. I said, he does. He knows. And he's speaking, not just to you, but to the people who love you, to the ones praying for you. He's orchestrating moments you won't understand until later. But when you do, you'll see. He was there all along. If someone you love is in their own tunnel right now, literal or spiritual, share this with them. Let them know they are not alone. God is speaking, and he knows their name. I still light the 3rd candle every week. I still carry my mother's journal. I still tell the story. Because it's not just my story. It's his. And it's proof that even in the darkest tunnels, the light still burns. It's been over a year now since they pulled me out of that tunnel. Some days feel normal. I go to the market, I have coffee with my mother, I watch the sunset from my window. Other days, I'm still there, in the dark, listening for his voice. People ask me all the time, how did you forgive them? And I tell them the truth. I didn't. Not on my own. I can't. But Jesus can. And when I gave him my anger, my grief, my trauma, he took it. He carried it. And he replaced it with something I never expected. Compassion. Not for what they did, but for who they are. Lost, broken, blind. The same way I was. My mother is still on her journey. She hasn't fully embraced Yeshua yet, but she's asking questions. She's reading the Gospels. She lights the third candle every week. And she prays, not the prayers she was taught, but raw, honest prayers. The kind God listens to. I believe she'll find him. The same way I did in the dark. When she finally stops hiding and starts seeking. I think about Yonatan, Liora, and Eitan often. I wonder what they would say if they could see me now. I think Yonatan would smile. He always believed we'd get out. I think Liora would be proud. She wanted so badly to believe God was still there. I think Eitan would finally understand. That suffering doesn't mean God is absent. It means we're finally desperate enough to find him. I don't know why I survived and they didn't. I don't have an answer for that. I don't think I'm supposed to. But I do know this. Their lives mattered. Their suffering wasn't meaningless. And their stories are part of mine. Part of his. If you're listening to this, and you're in a tunnel right now, maybe it's grief. Maybe it's addiction. Maybe it's fear. Or shame. Or a pain you can't name. I want you to know something. You are not alone. God is not hiding from you. He's waiting for you to stop running. Stop pretending. Stop trying to fix it on your own. And just seek him. Call his name. Yeshua. Jesus. The light that doesn't go out. I'm not asking you to have all the answers. I didn't. I'm not asking you to understand everything. I don't. I'm just asking you to take one step. Open the Gospels. Start with John. Chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Read that. Sit with it. And ask him, are you real? He'll answer. Maybe not the way you expect. Maybe not immediately. But he will answer. The same way he answered me. The same way he answered my mother. At the same time. In the same hour. Across impossible distance. Because that's who he is. I still carry my mother's journal with me. I still light the third candle. I still remember my grandmother's words. God hides so we will seek. And I still believe that every tunnel has an end. Every darkness has a dawn. Every captive has a rescuer. His name is Jesus. And he knows yours. This is my testimony. Not because I'm special. Not because I'm strong. But because he is faithful. And if he can meet me in a tunnel beneath Gaza, if he can speak to my mother in a dream hundreds of miles away, if he can orchestrate the impossible to prove he's real, then he can meet you. Wherever you are, whatever you've done, however far you've run, he's already there, waiting, with a light that will never go out. Seek him. You won't regret it.